So my first comment that I'll say, so again, this was the technology breakout session. Let's see, I want to see if I can get the chat. I started typing the link for the group here. I'll get that in just a second. Anyways, technology breakout session. I think there's a very interesting concept that we kind of danced around a little bit of what technology are we ready to evaluate and test now versus what are the longer term technologies that need to be developed. Thank you, Ben, for posting the doc there. It's in the chat. So I think some of this is what can we do today? What should we do in a decade type time frame when we have a base camp, and what should we look at in the long term? Generally speaking, there's always a topic of ISRU. What do you do to live off the land effectively, and what sort of tools and capabilities do you need for that? What sort of things do you expect to derive from ISRU capabilities as well? There's also this concept of there are certain things we know we could probably look for or develop or use on the lunar surface, but there's also this whole playing ground of what we'll learn once we're at the lunar surface and what sort of capabilities we can get from that. That's kind of the idea of why we hope to establish a Artemis base camp, right? For the discovery, for the impromptu nature of what we'll come up with on the lunar surface. So that's kind of a preface to some of our conversation. And the next set I have here is I'll kind of run through the list of what we discussed. And I'll also add, I did a bad job at home at grabbing people for white papers. So if there's any of these topics that really struck a chord in you that we discussed, please feel free to go to the Google Doc and list your name under the white paper section. I'll already thank Zhu Wang for volunteering for a couple of them there. But going through from a high level on some of the conversation that we had, thermal is a very big issue on the lunar surface. So what sort of technology needs to be developed for energy and thermal management? How localized, how decentralized should some of these things be? Wireless power transmission. I think generally speaking, power transmission is a big technology that needs to be developed for the lunar surface, not just wireless. But I think wireless offers a lot of very interesting challenges as well. Just part of that conversation, wireless is generally speaking a lower power transmission capability. We still should expect to depend on cables, physical cables for longer distance and higher power transmission. But what sort of things can be done to increase the power transmission for something like wireless? We also talked Leslie made a very good comment relating to validation of site selection methods. I think this ties very much into when we go to develop and design a Artemis base camp, what sort of assessment or figures of merit should be developed before choosing the site and before laying any actual hardware on that site. Evaluating, I think, kind of goes in line with what people might call maintaining as well. But I believe that there's a very distinct difference between maintenance and evaluation. Some of it, I believe, ties into how accurate were we, or what sort of things did we expect to see when we chose this site, and how do you evaluate that down the road and over the long term? I think there's a lot of very valuable lessons that can be learned from that. Some examples were regolith bearing capacity. Were we accurate with our numbers? Were we inaccurate? What did we learn from these processes, and how can that go forward? We also talked about solar versus nuclear power generation. Solar panels have a rich history in flight, and so does nuclear capability. What should we be planning on for initial Artemis base camp development, and what sort of ISRU type development should go on in the future? I think there's a lot of open conversations there that really kind of hit some people there. Do we start with solar? Do we start with nuclear? Do we start with a hybrid of both? What can we develop in the long term? There was a good conversation about sintering ISRU capabilities. Do we sinter the lunar surface for road development? What about landing pads? What sort of architecture do we need for a lunar spaceport? That's one of the other lines down a little further. But yes, there's a lot of ISRU type topics. The concept of a lunar ISRU power plant that's currently scheduled in sometime in the 2030s. What sort of ISRU capabilities would folks expect? What sort of ISRU capabilities would folks want to test on the lunar surface? And what sort of things could we see being developed from that? This one came up a couple times as far as centralized computing as a service. That also ties into the IT infrastructure and the value of immediate transmission, direct to Earth communication, or storing on the lunar surface. I think there's always a question about what is the high priority data, when does it have to reach the surface, when do we want to keep it localized, what sort of technology do we need to develop around that. Transportation technology is always a fun topic. I believe right now, I believe there's a LTV announcement that's going on. But lunar transportation capabilities is something that definitely have to be developed and refined further. This also kind of ties into the idea of, I'm going to say, dust mitigation, which was another topic we discussed. Generally speaking, for dust mitigation, one of the ideas we talked about was, do you have to develop something that is, ideal or very capable, effectively over-engineer it, I would use the words, terrestrially before sending it to the lunar surface? Or do you take your best design, put it on the lunar surface, and basically evaluate it as it's being used? There seemed to be general consensus that you're going to get more value out of in situ testing of dust mitigation type systems. And I would argue also for lunar transportation systems as well. But the more you can test in the actual lunar environment, the more data and the more information you can get from it. I think that also kind of ties into another topic we discussed as far as what sort of capabilities we would need on the terrestrial surface for evaluating any lunar technologies. Large vacuum chambers, dirty vacuum chambers that are able to do mining scale, test mining scale equipment. That's something we discussed. What other sort of ground facilities would you expect a group like NASA to be able to service and provide that might be out of the financial scope of a private company or an organization or a research institution to staff? What sort of things like that might we need? The concept of a lunar proving ground, what sort of capabilities you need on the lunar surface, that's been talked about at other workshops in the past, but that's something else we did touch on as far as the importance of having abilities on the lunar surface for furthering technology development and testing on the lunar surface. There was another conversation about technology for refurbishing, repurposing, reusing material that we bring up on the lunar surface. I think that's a very interesting technology development. Basically anything you bring to the lunar surface is an asset. If you go with that idea, then even defunct systems you have on the lunar surface is an asset or becomes an asset, just in different forms. If you have a defeated or spent dust mitigation method, let's say, that succeeded or failed, well, how can you scrap it, recast it, reform it, or find other purposes for it in that lunar environment? Again, it's very expensive to bring things to the lunar surface. So how can you extend the life of things in different forms? Another topic for lunar ISRU, we're developing certain materials or certain capabilities such as magnetic and transportation capabilities. That was something else we discussed. And I think some of the other ones here I already generally hit on. I'll throw out technology development on the lunar surface with a focus on terrestrial benefits. I think that conversation opened up some interesting thoughts as far as, do you try to derive technology on the lunar surface, with the idea, with the theory that it's going to be very valuable terrestrially, or do you kind of go up there and see what you discover as you go and how that might be used terrestrially as well? So I think that pretty much brings me through the full list of the major topics that we discussed. Again, if anybody has any other comments that they want to see in this, please feel free to go into the spreadsheet and add it in the green section. If folks have any interest in working on a white paper moving forward on the value of certain technologies that we could be developing from Artemis Base Camp, please feel free to add your contact information as well. I think with that, unless there's any questions or comments, I think I'll call that my spiel, my summary of Group 3.